everybody is now following content creators. Everybody is following their little self-identified bubbles, and it becomes a very important part of their identity. We are seeing a splintering of relationships. We're seeing a splintering of families. And this is actually why I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about the interaction of your work, both of your work, is what comes next. Well, because so many young families and even, millennial families, older families are now suffering with a question of identity. Are our interests as a family less important than the interests of a group, a society, whatever? And what is it like for me to be an individual in the context of a relationship? I think that's also changing. What do you think, Adam?
I agree with that. So I've worked with, over the last 10 years alone, I've worked with thousands of clients through therapy and through coaching. And again, people keep coming in with this idea that they need to go find themselves, that their identity is somewhere out there in the world. They have to discover it. Unfortunately, many of them try to look for it under the nearest person and they jump into bed under the nearest blanket.
Or the nearest YouTube channel, actually.
Or anything that is dopamine saturated, really. And then they start pulling in identifiers of things that they enjoy, or they pull in pieces of self that they think are self. And unfortunately, what most of them miss, and Sebastian, maybe you can work with me on this and figure out if this is the key piece here. What most of them miss is that we craft our identity through the decisions we make every day. Are we pursuing our principles and staying true to them? Are we pursuing goals and staying true to those? It's not even about marking achievements. It's pursuing a greater purpose. And then how you pursue it, how you engage in it. Can people trust you? Who are you? Are you a predictable pattern of behavior aligning with your principles and your purpose? If you are, that is identity. If you are not, that also is identity. And you'll have to run and cope and hide and deal with that until you're ready to handle it and become a better version of self. But we invent that identity with every decision we make. If I quit everything I do right now and go become a drug addict on the street, my identity changes because of my choices I have made. I'm no longer the person that I am. But if I am a drug addict on the street and I choose to reinvent myself and live in alignment with my principles and in alignment with greater purpose, then that is who I become. I cease to be the person I was before. I'm not a collection of hobbies or interests or any of
group
those.
affiliations, right? So we're talking about malleability. You're saying that you actually have significant control over your identity and how you're going to be manifesting that existence in your
Full
form.
control.
You have full control. That also means that you will be equally as malleable based on what you believe and who you follow, right? So who you follow, who you consume will define that.
So
But at
how
the
do you
same
determine
time,
that? Your principles and your purpose. That
so
determines
it's
who
more of
you're
a
going with.
curation more than anything, right? So what happens is that as we are learning how to be in the world, that's increasing more divisive, more consuming, and more attractive. Actually, everybody and everything is now marketing itself. Every person that has an online presence, every company is out there trying to imprint their identity on you. And we're actually curating more than anything. We're curating what is right, what is wrong, based on our internal moral principles. I'm curious, Sebastian, what role do you see this definition of your personal principles playing in this, definition of your social identity? And then down the line, how is that going to impact us as we go through this huge societal change?
We well, there was a lot that was said there, but there's a few pieces I'd love to touch on. Our story of self is generally tied to our experiential knowledge, our perception of the world, right? So, as an example, if you grew up in a town where everyone was a Republican and all you knew was Republicans, it would not be unreasonable for you to think everyone is a Republican because your experience tells you everyone is, or vice versa, or any story. And mostly by design, that is how we interface with the world, especially if we are still unconscious. We allow our personal experience to tell us what is true and what makes sense to us. And I think that is one of the birthrights of showing up on this rock, is getting to experience all of that. And what is it like? The work then becomes in exchanging What we could say is an inferior truth or an inferior value system for a superior one. And if we are seeking truth, we will probably be doing this for the rest of our life. There was a great study that was done by the World Economic Forum. Whether or not you like the World Economic Forum or not is beside the point, but they spent some time on this study that they were looking for defining characteristics of lasting success, or we could say of lasting relevant people. So these are people that have been successful and relevant for decades, not for years. Like, how do they continue to stay relevant? So you could think of Sir Richard Branson as an example. But there were a few characteristics that continue to show up. Number one, and the basis of much of my work, is self-awareness. It's the beginning of everything. Without a conscious understanding of your behavior, it's very hard for anything to change. So we could say anywhere we get an unintended consequence, positive or negative, we likely lack self-awareness, or we could say awareness. But the next one in there is being a lifelong learner, or being an agile learner, our ability to pivot our position in light of superior information. And this gets increasingly hard as we get older. In the scientific community, it's largely understood if you don't come up with a new theorem by the time you were 35, you most likely never will, because you become crystallized in your paradigm of the world. Your story of yourself, the other, and the world becomes crystallized to the point in which you will not likely discover something new, because you're simply existing in the world that you created in your head. So being a lifelong learner is important, our ability to continue to create and learn. And that means that we are upgrading our identity constantly. We're upgrading our story of self constantly in light of new systems.
If you like this clip, I know you're going to enjoy the full episode. You can watch it right here.